Is it afternoon or morning? It's morning here, so I've just finished my coffee. I don't know about you. You still having one? Excellent. Well, welcome, Bill. And you and I have talked a little bit over the last few months and connected, and it was interesting when I reach out to coaches like yourself and we connect and we realize just how much we have in common, right? And is it because of the journey that we were on, or is it because of where we're at in our lives today becomes really the question? But I'm glad you took the time and connected with me, and we've chatted a lot. As you know, I love sailing. I haven't done enough of that over the last years, but you're still actively in that. And I think there was so many parallels that I saw in that. In fact, I think when we first connected, I mentioned, in Australia when I was consulting, one of the scenarios that we used to play out with people was, if you're on a sailboat and people had to do different tasks, who's going to lead the ship? Who's going to be calling the shots? And, and things like that. And in fact, there was a program that actually took people out.
Oh no. Oh no. Oh no.
All right.
Technology was not my friend.
I'm not sure how much of that you got, but again,
I got the part where getting people on a boat to help figure out roles, responsibilities, all those things.
Yeah, excellent. So over to you. Tell everybody a little bit about yourself, your background, and let's talk about leadership. Because this is really about the leadership intelligence, right?
Well, and I liked your first question. What led us to this point? Was it the experiences, the journey? And I think they blend together, much like what we find, as we cultivate and develop leaders at all levels. It's the journey that gains the experiences, that brings the insights, that helps guide people down that path to learn how to act with intention, how to act with compassion, how to act with courage as leaders. And I do think that there's this. I certainly go back to some of the things I've learned in my years of being a sailor, and in fact, as a side note, I every year I get a little blurb congratulating me on LinkedIn about my many years of being with Room for Crew, which is the name of my sailboat. And it's only because one of my former crew wrote a post or a recommendation for me about he had not been a sailor and what it was like to be on a boat and learn and be an active member of a team and understand roles and responsibilities. And it was such a great recommendation, but LinkedIn, you have to have a company to link it to. So I made a company, but
all right.
so it looks like I'm the owner and skipper of Room for Crew, which I am, but it's a sailboat. But I think it's those things that we learn how to in our journeys to learn how to let go, how to delegate, how to use training, how to use instruction effectively, but then how to provide guides and how to provide touch bases and define what metrics are. Was this successful or not? Did the sale go up or down? Those are pretty easy, but you can translate the ideas of those metrics into the workplace. And I think it helps create the ability for helping new leaders especially get to that point of stepping back, going from individual contributor to becoming an intentional leader of people, not of things, not of tasks. And I think that's one of the things that you and I had when we first talked about it, was just this whole, process of the growth of a person into truly becoming, going from contributor to supervisor to managing to leading, and
Yeah.
that journey that we all go through. And you had some great, please share some, because you had some really good insights too that I should be shared.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting to, your IT background, my IT background, but then the flip into, what we do today, which is, behavior and leadership and humanity and psychology and all the sciences and all of that coming together. And as you were talking there, I was just wondering, are we born leaders? That nurture or nature conversation. And you've got twins, so I know that conversation can take us down that rabbit warren again. But so it's interesting, and I'm going to share a little bit of my background in how that came to be. It was high school. I was, captain of volleyball team, captain of soccer team. I was very competitive in sports, but being a captain was a responsibility that I had to learn to motivate people and encourage them and not, let anyone who missed the ball feel bad. We're just encouraging each other and so forth. So now that goes back a long way, but that's where my journey kind of started. So, back to, when you're working with leaders, do you find that there is a background in what differentiates a good leader from a bad one, if you like, or is that even a good question?
I think it's a marvelous question. And it's so, yeah, the path I chose too. I have this kind of weird thing where I've been a CIO in my career, but then I also have been a CLO, before I jumped into this, journey of learning consulting. But through those years, I first I worked with leaders, but then it was like developing leaders, and got into this whole idea of developing, leaders at all levels. And the thing that always caught me was, especially if you focus on the idea of leaders at all levels, so you're starting at early levels, getting ready for supervisory kind of things, the
Mhm.
people that tended to follow them, they shared, at least for me, one common trait, and that was curiosity. I think people who are curious, they ask the questions, why are we doing this?
Mhm.
Why are we still doing this? Uh, but I think, and it's always around. It's not focused on people. It's always focused on workflow processes, those kind of things, where they're just curious if there's a way to make it better, faster, easier, safer.
Yeah.
And I think, as I watch those people grow, they're the ones that tend to nurture others' ability to ask questions, to be curious.
Mhm.
And I think, if is that part of our nature? Maybe. I mean, all babies are curious, right? So I think we all come that way. I think that the challenge is how do we nurture and keep that spirit, you know, alive, going, growing.
Mhm.
And I think that's part of the leadership development process, the people
Right.
development process.
Yeah. And it's important what you mentioned is curiosity about the process and the people that are running the process. You and I talk a lot about, there's in every business, it doesn't matter whether it's a large corporation or a small business, you've got the business stuff and then you've got the people stuff. And you need to figure out where the two intersect and when to focus on KPIs and when to focus on people. But I really like the curiosity thing, because then you become curious about how come this person does well and that person's not. Where is that person struggling? Is that the kind of thing that you're talking about? Right?
Mhm. I had a leader who nurtured me, and they said you have to do the first KPI before you can do the second KPI. And I didn't understand what that meant at the time. And what they said was, you have to understand the key personal investment before you understand the performance. And I went, wow. And that kind of, from that has grown my model of, I call it the three P's. But you
Mm.
have to align people to process, but you have to make sure it's aligned to their purpose. And if you don't have all those things lined up, then you're not going to get performance.
Mm.
So, having people have the ability to ask questions, to understand, we all have to answer the question to ourselves, what's in it for me? So there's a point where we go to work to do something good. I mean, I've yet to meet anyone who ever intentionally said, I'm going in today to, be a bad person, a bad worker, and screw stuff up. So there are people that I've met that said, I'm going to do enough to get by. Different issue. And then now we're back down to, how do we motivate, as you mentioned in your example of learning how to be a leader.
Mm.
But you've got to, start to get that personal investment before you ever have to worry about, the performance and the process stuff, because, to get the mind, you got to get the heart.
Yeah. So the question that comes to my mind is, we've come across people that have great talent, right? But whenever they hit a problem, they just call out for help instead of trying to figure it out themselves, or the curious side of things. How do you stop somebody from diving into, you're there as a consultant, the coach, whatever role you've got on, and every time they have a problem, they're texting you, Bill, what do I do here? What do I do there? Have you come across that, and how do you shift people out of it?
I have, and both in my consulting role, but also in my former, roles as leader. And, those are people that I have found that are, they have been penalized for taking initiative. So now they're, at that point of going, if I do something, I'm going to get yelled at, and nobody wants to get yelled at. So now we're back down to the, how do you nurture? How do you create?
Yeah.
How do you create that safe space? And then for me, I usually use the ideas of turning the questions around and asking, let's have a conversation. What would you do? Well, I don't know. Well,
Mm.
let's break it down into a smaller chunk. And this part here, what do you think it means? How would you make it go away, or how would you overcome it as an obstacle, or how would you create a resource or solution? And then start scaffolding those into a more comprehensive answer. But encouraging and supporting and letting people know it's okay to try this,
Right.
because now it's more than just, they don't know, they do. It's
Mm.
creating the space for them to have the confidence to act without fear. And that is that psychological safety is we
Mm.
talk about it a lot, but it has such an impact. And if we don't have that as leaders, then we're really harming our own people.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, I like that. It's an interesting one, because there is just I see it also with our team, with different people I talk to, different coaches, leaders. They want to learn more, but they're afraid to execute on the stuff that they know they should be doing, right? And the coaching scenario then says, well, as you said, you know how to do this. Why aren't you doing it? Well, where could you start? What's the first thing you might want to do, right? As opposed to the let me show you what to do, right? Which is knowing when to mentor, when to consult, versus when to coach people, right? The premise is, as you said, everybody has good intentions, but their actions, and hence our behavior intelligence is the catalyst here. They might have the best intentions, but if they've learned the wrong way and are being penalized, as you say, throughout their career, the actions and the way they show up, because we observe them through their behavior, not through their mindset, right? I wish I could read minds, but it's still something that's eluded me. So it's an interesting perspective, right?
This is where I think leaders have such an impact. I again go back to a former leader who used to say that one of their key roles was to provoke conversations. And I watched them at time where they pose the question and then step back. And that was, I think, the key was to step back and let people actually have the conversation, because as we all know, once the leader says something, it goes down. And I realized over time that what we really need to focus on is helping people move beyond consensus and move more into clarity. And I think with so many businesses and teams, everybody wants everybody to get along, and we want, unanimous agreement. And I'm not saying we should have infighting. Don't misunderstand me. But I do think that if we focus more on having a shared understanding, that we can start identifying, what does success look like? How are we going to measure it together, and allow that kind of variance that spurs innovation, that spurs conversations, that provokes those kind of discussions, that let people kind of look at opportunities that may be being missed when everybody's being silent, to be consensual, and or to gain consensus, sorry for that. And that it's okay to disagree, in a respectful manner, of course. But as leaders, I think it's, key for us to go, let's have, well, you don't have to agree with me, but let's talk about it. And when we get to the point of saying, okay, we have to make a decision, and now I'm gonna have to make a decision, but at least we now have a shared understanding of why. It's not just a do it because I said so kind of thing. And I think that, if we go full circle back to the idea that if we all understand what our shared purpose is, and we now have, people to purpose to process, then we'll get performance.
Right. Yeah. And is that how you apply your 3 Ps? Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. So that shared understanding, if I'm understanding you properly here, and I guess we're doing it right now, right? My understanding of that is that, people need to be encouraged to be curious, to ask questions, to express their understanding. Otherwise, you don't reach that shared understanding, right? And when you have people that are just saying, yep, I understand, or no questions, how do you break them out of that so that you can get them out of their heads so that they can actually participate in reaching a shared understanding?
It's back to asking them the questions, and getting, you have to, this is the provoking part, I think, of the process, is to query them, to but creating that space where when they respond, they aren't immediately attacked, they aren't defensive. As leader, we owe it to ourselves to say, how are we going to respond, and to do so with intention, to create that safety space for that individual. And over time, I mean, if you are in a space where you're encouraged and you're supported, and you're not penalized for taking a risk, or if you can show me you did something right, your intentions were all good, didn't work out that way, I'll be like, okay, what's the lessons learned? And then we share that with everybody, so that we all understand two things. One, here's the actual thing. Let's not do this again, and try it this way. But the second thing that's even more important is everyone gets to see that you did something, good intentions, good ideas, didn't work, and you didn't get punished. And that message is even stronger than the actual, example, because that's the kind of that's where leaders, I think, bring out the innovation with their teams, and bring out people that are now going to be able to lead at all levels. Because the whole idea of leader as manager of tasks, no, that's you're wasting time and energy. You're losing your strategy if you're at the tactical level every single time. And there's times to roll up your sleeves, yes, indeed. But if you're supposed to be looking ahead, creating those doors for the future, networking, your people, creating areas of collaboration, and reducing the barriers your people have brought to you, just so that they can perform successfully. So, this is where you want your team, your people, to be able to take charge and lead.
Mm. And they can only do that when they have that shared understanding, right?
Mhm.
So if I can just put it down into 2 or 3 points here so that we get clarity on that a little bit further. To reach shared understanding, a leader needs to encourage people to speak up. But the challenge is sometimes people have had a past conditioning that, oh, you're the boss, I better be quiet, right? And then when you ask them to open up, if you ask them the wrong way, they'll shut down even more, right?
Mhm.
Uh, so you need to find the right approach, and if I've heard you correctly, the second thing is when they start participating, you got to catch yourself not judging, not negatively um, responding to that. So there's an element in that process. Is what I'm hearing is, number one, encourage people, create a safe environment. Number two, catch yourself if you're going to go down the wrong path, and to actually, three, bring in positive reinforcement. Is that how you would cover it? Or
Absolutely.
you can, this is yours. I'm kind of trying to get in your head, but do you want to rephrase it in your own way, or do you have a method that you use that's explains that?
I think you did a wonderful job, and you're very good at reflective listening. Your summation, I think, was accurate and on target, and I think that's one of the things I don't have a single way of doing it, and this is maybe one of the things I bring, to people when I work with them, is I'm not a big box type consultant. I have a process, I have a framework, but it's not I don't do it the exact same way because, came out of the box and, go apply it. There are companies and well known, and
Yeah.
they're in the Fortune 500, and they made, great success. And I just look at this and say, when I work with a person, every group is a little different. We all come with different baggage from, leaders, or from a merger that they went through that was horrible, or some kind of acquisition. You never know. And so it's the idea of if the broad idea is, if you have a space and you create the place and you support the people and you model that behavior. And we talk about it. I'm sure we've all read about, the emotional intelligence, and all of those factors within human beings. EQ is part of leadership. I think I took that as an assumption. So if I missed that, forgive me. But the idea that you hear yourself, you understand your actions on others, that you bring that to the table, and then just start modeling the idea of, how do you ask the questions, how do you support the person, how do you support the team, how do you create the place where they can start innovating and leading and bringing solutions to you, and even better, when they start identifying problems ahead of the problems.
Mm.
Uh, I had a team that I led many years ago, and while their focus was on training, it was in a call center environment. Um, I had two particular individuals, and that I inherited, and they had come from an operational space where it was strictly this: you do it this way because this is the way you're told to do it. And I inherited them, and it took a little while to bring them out, but they ended up becoming rock stars because they had a fascination with metrics, and they started creating a link to the operational dashboards. And all of a sudden they could see a spike, and they brought it to my attention saying, "Hey, we're seeing this spike in errors in our call center areas in this one area. Maybe there's a change." Well, fast forward, it was a regulatory change. that had not made it into the training world's, you know, understanding
Right.
yet. So we were still training new hires on existing, you know, information, but the rules have changed. And
Mm-hmm.
because the people had been now given the permission, you know, I didn't say no to, you know, metrics isn't your job. No, let's see if we can find something. We were able
Mm-hmm.
to jump probably a good 60 days before that information would have made it into our hands, into our books, into our training classes. And you know, the amount of people that were going through new hire for a call center, the volume's pretty high. So all those people now don't have the wrong information. They have the correct current information. But it's only because these two people had, you know, had the idea to go look for it. And here's where I say, and I created the space that said, ask the question. If you don't know where it is, let's go find it. I don't know where it is. Go find it.
Yeah.
Thanks. You know,
Yeah.
so it's those are the things. I think each place, each space is a little different. But I
Mm.
mean, for me, it always comes back down to, if you understand, you know, what our shared purpose is,
Yeah.
understand where the processes are in the workflow, and then talk to the people about, you know, them, you know, understand them, that connection.
Yeah.
Then I think, you know, it all leads down to, you know, improving, you know, the performance.
Mm. Interesting. Yeah. And you know, a few things in that is one that comes to mind is the fact that if somebody just does the same thing every day and they're not curious about it, then nothing will ever change. It will just continue happening the same way. Um, if that person, if anyone just was curious about one thing every day, now look at yourself, you know, with all your experience, you know, I'm just going to go back to how you first answered this particular question was I I don't have a method that I follow step by step with every single person because every single person is unique and their context is unique.
Mhm.
And I think that's where you and I, you know, have that parallel because, as you know, the reason Acumatch is here today is there is a trillion combinations within Acumatch so that every single person that does an Acumatch sees themselves in their unique
Mhm.
um, map, right? Whereas before the tools, and I had to throw away all that stuff and start from scratch with that premise. Okay, everybody's unique because previous to that, we were putting people in boxes, you know, 16 boxes or 4 boxes or right, and it just doesn't work, you know, when you walk into a situation and well, I thought you were this type of person, but look at you now, and it's nothing like that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's it's very interesting, and again, you know, I think we have so much in common that those things come naturally, but you weren't born with them, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think there is that level of we come, from the beginning, you know, levels of curiosity and wonder, and
Mm-hmm.
and through the years, at times, sometimes it's the way our schooling system happens. You know, we're put into boxes, and depending on the people that were in front of us, you know, perhaps that wonderment, that curiosity was kind of squashed. So I often look and thought, you know, how can we maintain that, and how can we bring it out, and how can we support it,
Mm-hmm.
and and uh, um, and it's kind of fun to watch. You know, you alluded earlier, and I will say, I'm a dad of twins, and they're now in the workforce. Yay! Um, um, double
Yeah.
yay! But it's been interesting to see, um, the curiosity. We made it a point. My wife was so insistent about, you know, having dinner at the table, and it was one of the most joyous things we did as they were younger. But we always had the questions about what made you laugh today, or what made you go aha. It was never what was your day like. It was,
Mm.
you know, how can we provoke something and maintain that curiosity? And I've listened to both of mine, going out and they tell me about, oh, I asked this question today, or I asked this question today, or I asked that question today. And I'm going, great. And I think, we need more people to ask questions, because that's the way we improve our processes. That's the way we change the flow of work to allow either new technology or new ideas or better, faster, easier, safer ways to do it. If we don't ask questions, you never know.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and parenting is so important because not even just us with our kids, although that's obviously played a big role, but our parents and how we were conditioned, right? And so all the leaders that you are or I am working with, and anyone is working with, has a history. And sometimes I find that they use that as an excuse. Do you find the same thing? That's how I've been conditioned. My parents brought me up this way, and it becomes an excuse. I've seen people in their 60s pivot their whole everything that they had learned. A light bulb moment has happened, and this person's changed in a 12-month period of working with them. So, where I was going with that, I guess, and I kind of went on a little bit of a rabbit warren here, but the thing is, people have the ability to do anything that they want to do if they have the intention and the commitment, and they want to be curious. Back to your point of curiosity, right? So anyone out there that's saying, I am, past conditioning, this is who I am, the old, I'm a dominant person, get over it, that's just the way I am, right?
Well, I had a conversation recently with someone who said something, trying to find the right words. Basically, we're saying, you're too old to learn new things. These are racing stripes. I understand that. But, it was one of the things that came out of that. I looked at them and said, how on earth could you possibly say that? And I said, and I'll be honest, I'll share, I'm a boomer. And I said, if you think about it, we have been learning our entire careers. When I entered the workforce, there were green screens and paper tape was just starting to come out. We were able to use keyboards. And then we had, PCs and here we are with, all that power plus, 50 times more in our hands. And I said, the difference is that, people don't stop learning. They don't have a reason to. So, I'll come back down to the curiosity purpose here of saying, if you find something like that, then you haven't made the value proposition clear. If I don't have a reason to learn, I'm not going to take, 20 hours of class if I just need to learn how to do one thing. Okay, well, what's in it for me? Let's answer the what's in it for me question. And at that point in time, start asking them questions. How are you going to apply it? What do you think this could be used for better? Is there a way we could tap into this over here? And even pull somebody else in and go, hey, Joe's learning this. Sally, what do you think? And then now we have some exchange of ideas. We have peer-to-peer support. We have peer-to-peer connections. We have peer-to-peer learning, which is incredibly powerful. Right. But the issue comes back down to is there's a reason. So we're back down to purpose, and if I I'll learn anything in the world, because I'm curious, but I'll really learn it if I have a reason for it. If I need to understand how to do this because I can apply it, it's closer to my heart, therefore it's closer to my mind, and I'm going to do it.
Yeah, love it. There is just so much that needs to be unpacked with leaders. I love your 3 Ps, the curiosity, every coach that I have talked to, that's, the first thing that they come forward with, that they shine in, is we call it the curious questions. So being curious sometimes has biases and filters, right? Okay, and judgments. But
We're human.
yeah, but rather than puking them out, we figured out how to put it into a question, right? This isn't kind of the way I think this should be done, but rather than telling you, why don't I ask some questions here to see whether I'm right, or whether you're right in your approach, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's an interesting challenge. So looking to wrap it up here a little bit, so we don't go too long. Biggest takeaways for people, what would you advise listeners today based on your methodology and the things that you want to leave them with today?
I think learning is strategic, and that as a part of a leader's strategy is to encourage the people to learn how to be curious all over again. And it starts by just asking questions and supporting the space for people to answer safely without repercussions, and then to weave them all back into the idea that as a team there's a shared purpose, and that you have to follow processes. But asking the questions allows you to see ways to improve processes, and all of that brings people back into being able to perform successfully. And if that point, if you can do all those things, then truly you are leading people and leading into the future. And I think that's what we all want to do, intentionally, and with purpose for ourselves, that we're doing something worthwhile, helping our friends, our team, our coworkers, and making it a better day for everyone.
Nice, well said. If I can share my takeaways from today, because I'm always learning. Good reminders about the shared understanding, reaching that understanding, creating a safe place. And look, I was talking to someone last week, and they said, I'm no longer employable, I'm too old, they're saying. I'm going, oh my God, this is now your opportunity to actually take all that experience and bring it to life through sharing all of that knowledge, because I think young people today want that. They want to learn from, the past generations, all the things that we learned through our journey, to not have to make the same mistakes in a lot of cases, because technology has moved very quickly, and we have AI today and all of these things. And sure, you can say, "Oh, you're old, you don't understand that." I'll challenge people on that. Right? But the human interaction has stayed the same, right? And leadership is 90% that, and 20% all this technology and stuff that's moving quickly. Now, there are situations when the balance is the other way around, but that's when you're just doing the job. It's not when you're actually interacting and leading and encouraging people.
I think I have found that over the years, no matter how much high technology we use, we crave the high touch of others, that we want the connection. We want to find ways to communicate and collaborate over whatever tool we have at hand. Yeah, it's great to use, but it's this that we value.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's critical.
Mhm.
And in a virtual world that we live in today, guess what? People are starting to crave getting back into the office. I was just talking to someone last week, and he said, COVID and everything, the last 4 years, I need to get into an office. Right. So it's interesting. We do need that. We can't. We're only connecting up to chest line, right? But there's also the energy that we need to sense and feel through conversations, through interaction, the facial expressions, all those things. Look, I can talk for another half an hour on all of these things. We have to be careful here. Your connection is slowing down a little bit. Are you okay there? We might be wrapping up anyway.
Yeah, my apologies. We just had the lights just suddenly in our house just go like this.
Oh,
It's sunny.
okay.
I don't know why, but all of a sudden I just saw everything go dim and it came back up. So I apologize.
All right.
I think the
Terrific.
squirrels were
Well,
outside. They weren't running as.
chewing your lines. But look, Bill, thank you. I really appreciate it. Your wisdom today and sharing that information. It's so powerful. If anyone wants to get in touch with Bill, it's Ryan Consulting, right? Do you want to share your email at all, Bill?
Sure. It's bill@williamjryan.com. It's all one word, williamjryan.com. And that's my website too, williamjryan.com.
Perfect. Thank you for doing that.
Thank you.
And a shameless plug, as you all know, there's a book coming out. Volume 1 will be out this month, and I'm really excited. It's going to be a huge reference book from decades of experience. And again, as you and I were talking earlier, we have a trait that maybe a lot of leaders don't do, and that is when you experience something and it makes you curious, I write it down because I know I'm going to go back to it at some stage. So these books that I'm launching are really that collection of decades of stuff that I had in drawers and bits of paper and now online. So it's very exciting. I'm excited. But again, Bill, thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure. Take care, and you and I will talk some more.
I look forward to it. I can't wait for the book.
All right.